The Sunday afternoon sun streamed through Mom's dining room windows as Grace's laughter echoed off the walls. My 7-year-old son Danny sat frozen staring down at his untouched meatloaf, while my sister wiped tears from her eyes. "Your kid's the type who'll always need a helmet and a hand," she had just announced to the table, and everyone thought it was hilarious. Everyone except Danny. Everyone except me. The rage built in my chest as I watched my boy's shoulders slump forward. "At least mine doesn't need me to pay their rent and tuition," I shot back. Grace's face went white. Mom whispered urgently, "Let it go, Bernie." But I couldn't. Not this time. The silence that followed my comeback felt like a physical weight pressing down on the table. Grace's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down with shaking hands. Danny finally looked up, his brown eyes searching my face for some explanation of why his aunt found his struggles so amusing. "Bernie," that was uncalled for. Mom said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when she wanted to smooth over family friction. She reached across the table to pat Grace's arm. Grace was just teasing. Just teasing. The words hit me like a slap. I had been hearing that excuse my entire life whenever Grace crossed a line. When we were kids and she told the whole school that I wet the bed until I was 10. When she announced at my high school graduation party that I would never amount to anything because I was going to trade school instead of college. When she mocked my ex-wife, Sarah, during our divorce proceedings, calling her smart for leaving me with damaged goods. Teasing. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She just told my son he'll never be independent. How is that teasing? Grace recovered quickly, straightening in her chair with that defiant look I knew so well. "I'm being realistic, Bernie. Someone has to be. Danny has special needs, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone." The clinical way she said special needs made my skin crawl. Like Danny was some kind of medical condition instead of a bright, funny kid who happened to process the world differently than most people. "His name is Danny," I said through gritted teeth. "And he's made incredible progress this year. His therapist says—" "His therapist gets paid to say positive things," Grace interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "I've seen him, Bernie. The meltdowns, the stimming, the way he can't handle normal social situations. Face facts." Danny's breathing had changed. I recognized the pattern immediately, shallow, rapid breaths that meant he was getting overwhelmed. The familiar flutter of his fingers against his leg told me he was trying to self-regulate. My protective instincts kicked into high gear. "Danny, why don't you go watch cartoons in the living room?" I suggested gently. "We'll finish lunch in a minute." He nodded gratefully and slipped away from the table, his socked feet silent on the floor. I waited until I heard the television turn on before I turned back to Grace. "Don't you ever talk about him like that again?" Grace rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. The overprotective dad routine. This is exactly why he's not improving, Bernie. You coddle him instead of pushing him to be normal." Normal. The word exploded out of me. What the hell is normal, Grace? You're 29 years old. You've been out of college for 6 years, and you're living in Mom's basement. You haven't held a job for more than 3 months. You can't pay your own bills. But you want to lecture me about normal. Bernie, stop. Mom pleaded, but I was beyond stopping. No, I'm done pretending this is okay. Danny is 7 years old and he's already reading at a 4th grade level. He builds complex structures with his Legos that would impress an engineer. He remembers every single thing about cars and can tell you the horsepower of any engine just by hearing it run. But sure, Grace, tell me more about how he's not normal. Grace's phone buzzed against the table, and she grabbed it quickly, almost protectively. The movement caught my attention because it was so reflexive, so guilty. Her thumb moved rapidly across the screen, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like a group message thread before she angled the phone away from me. Who are you texting? I asked. Nobody, she said too quickly. Just checking the time. But her phone kept buzzing. over and over like someone was blowing up her messages. Each notification made her more nervous, her fingers fumbling as she tried to silence the device. Grace Marie Patterson. "You put that phone down this instant," Mom snapped. "We're having a family dinner." Grace's face flushed red as she reluctantly placed the phone face down on the table. But it continued vibrating, the sound muffled, but persistent. The guilty expression on her face was unmistakable. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Nothing's going on. Can we just eat?" But Danny's voice drifted in from the living room, high and sweet, as he talked to the television. "That's not how engines work, silly goose. Dad showed me the pistons move up and down, not side to side." Grace's phone buzzed again, and this time she couldn't resist. She flipped it over, and her face lit up with a smirk as she read whatever message had just come through. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, but she was fighting back a smile. I reached across the table and grabbed the phone before she could stop me. What I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. It was a group chat called Family Circus, with what looked like a dozen participants. The most recent message was from Grace. "He's going off again about how special Danny is. Should I get video?" The responses were immediate and brutal. "Yes, last time was hilarious." "Poor Bernie, so delusional." "That kid is going to end up in a group home and Bernie will still be making excuses." I scrolled up and found video after video of Danny. Danny having a sensory overload at Uncle Frank's birthday party last month. Danny stimming with his hands during Christmas dinner. Danny crying when the smoke alarm went off during Thanksgiving. Each video had commentary from my relatives. My own family members were sharing footage of my son's most vulnerable moments and laughing about them. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Grace lunged for the phone, but I held it out of her reach as I continued scrolling. The messages went back months. Grace wasn't just participating in this group, she was the administrator. She was the one recording the videos, uploading them, encouraging others to mock a 7-year-old child. One message thread made my stomach turn. "Bernie thinks his little robot is gifted, but we all know the truth. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance with that level of denial." "Give me my phone back," Grace demanded. "Robot." I looked up at her, my voice deadly quiet. "You called my son a robot." Mom was reading over my shoulder now, her face growing pale as she saw the messages. "Grace, what is this?" "It's nothing, Mom. It's just family venting. Everyone needs a place to—" "To what?" I stood up, still holding her phone. "To mock a child, to make fun of a little boy who's never done anything to hurt any of you." The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Grace, is Bernie reading these? Tell me you didn't leave your phone where he could see it." Grace's face crumpled as she realized the extent of what I had discovered. "Bernie, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been secretly filming my son's worst moments and sharing them with people for entertainment. Explain how you've turned my child into a joke." Danny appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. "Dad, why are you mad?" I looked at my beautiful, sensitive boy and felt something break inside my chest. How many times had Grace recorded him without his knowledge? How many family gatherings had she attended with the specific purpose of documenting his struggles? "Danny, buddy, go back to the living room for a minute." "Okay, Dad needs to finish talking with Aunt Grace." He nodded and disappeared again, but I knew he was listening. He always listened, always absorbed everything, always internalized the emotions in the room. I turned back to Grace, who was crying now, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. "Bernie, please, you don't understand. I wasn't trying to hurt him." "Then what were you trying to do?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because there was no good answer. There was no explanation that would make this okay. I looked at the phone again, scrolling through months of cruelty disguised as family bonding. My throat tightened as I read message after message, each one a small knife twisted into my heart. "If you ever," I said slowly, my voice barely controlled, "and I mean ever, record my son again without permission, if you ever share another video or photo or story about him, if you ever make him the subject of your entertainment again, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Grace's tears stopped. Her face hardened into the defiant mask I remembered from childhood. "Or what? What are you going to do, Bernie? You can't control what family talks about." "Watch me." I should have left right then. I should have taken Danny and walked out of that house and never looked back. But something in Grace's tone, something smug and calculated, made me pause. This wasn't just casual cruelty or thoughtless family gossip. This felt bigger, more systematic. "Bernie, honey, maybe we should all take a step back," Mom said, her voice shaky. She had gone pale, reading the messages, her hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. Grace didn't mean any harm. The automatic defense of Grace made my jaw clench, but it also made me think. How had Grace gotten away with this for so long? How had she convinced our entire extended family that mocking Danny was acceptable family behavior? My phone rang, the sound cutting through the tension. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Linda, Danny's occupational therapist. Weird timing for a Sunday call. "I need to take this," I said, stepping into the kitchen. "Hi, Bernie." Linda's voice was careful, professional. "I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend, but I wanted to follow up on some concerns that were brought to my attention." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, I received a call last week from someone claiming to be a family member. They expressed some questions about Danny's progress and your approach to his therapy." The kitchen felt like it was spinning. "What kind of questions?" "The caller suggested that you might be pushing Danny too hard, forcing him into therapies that might be counterproductive. They also mentioned concerns about your emotional stability as a single parent." I gripped the phone tighter. "Who called you?" "I can't reveal that information, Bernie, but I wanted to check in with you directly, because the concerns raised didn't align with what I observed during our sessions. You've been nothing but supportive and engaged in Danny's care." Through the doorway, I could see Grace and Mom talking in hushed voices. Grace kept glancing toward the kitchen, her expression nervous but calculating. "Linda, I need to ask you something. Have you received any other calls about Danny or me?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. The school called me last month asking about a complaint they received regarding Danny's IEP accommodations. Someone had suggested that you were requesting unnecessary services, and that Danny's needs might be overstated." The pieces were clicking into place like a jigsaw puzzle of betrayal. "Did they say who made the complaint?" Anonymous tip line. But Bernie, both the school and I reviewed Danny's file thoroughly, and there's absolutely no basis for these concerns. Your son is making excellent progress, and your advocacy for his needs has been exemplary." I thanked Linda and hung up, my mind racing. 2 anonymous complaints in recent weeks, both questioning my fitness as a parent, and Danny's legitimate needs, both coming after family gatherings where Grace had been present. I walked back into the dining room, where Grace was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, while Mom rubbed her shoulder comfortingly. "Feel better?" Grace asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Grace," I said carefully, "have you been calling Danny's school?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Grace's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, defiance, before settling on injured innocence. "Why would I call Danny's school?" "Answer the question." "Bernie, that's ridiculous. Why would I?" "Because someone has been making anonymous complaints about my parenting and Danny's treatment plan. Someone with detailed knowledge of his therapy schedule and school accommodations." Mom's hand stopped rubbing Grace's shoulder. She looked between us, confusion creeping across her face. Grace stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to these accusations. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I pulled out my own phone and opened my photo gallery. I had taken screenshots of her group chat messages before giving her phone back. "Because, according to these messages, you've been pretty vocal about thinking I'm an unfit parent." I showed Mom one of the screenshots, Grace writing, "Bernie is in such denial about Danny's condition. Someone needs to intervene before he ruins that kid completely." Mom's face went white. "Grace, You didn't actually call. I was worried, okay? Grace exploded. I was worried about Danny, and I thought maybe if professionals looked into the situation objectively. You filed false complaints against me. The words came out as a whisper, because I couldn't trust my voice at full volume. Grace's chin jutted out defiantly. They weren't false. You are pushing Danny too hard. All these therapies, all these accommodations, you're teaching him that he's broken, instead of helping him adapt to the real world. The irony hit me like a physical blow. Grace, who couldn't adapt to the real world herself, was criticizing my efforts to help my son navigate his challenges. Mom. I turned to my mother, desperate for some sanity. Are you hearing this? She's been sabotaging Danny's treatment. But Mom's expression was conflicted, torn between her two children. Bernie, maybe Grace has a point about not overscheduling Danny. Sometimes simpler is better. Overscheduling. I stared at her in disbelief. He has occupational therapy twice a week and speech therapy once a month. That's it. And it's working. He's thriving. But honey, Mom's voice took on that patient tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. Maybe you're seeing progress that isn't really there because you want it so badly. The words hit me like a slap. My own mother was doubting my perception of my son's development. Have you been talking to Grace about Danny's therapy? I asked slowly. Mom's guilty expression was answer enough. Mom, what did you tell her? Nothing specific, just, Mom. My voice was firm. What did you tell her? Mom fidgeted with her napkin. Grace was concerned, and I thought maybe if she understood what the therapists were saying, she might be more supportive. My blood turned to ice water. You shared Danny's therapy reports with her. Not shared exactly. Grace was asking questions, trying to understand, and I thought, you showed her his private medical information. Grace was watching this exchange with growing confidence, like she was gaining the upper hand. Bernie, calm down. I'm family. I care about Danny. You care about Danny? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that why you described his therapy reports in detail to Uncle Frank and Aunt Susan? Because according to these messages, they seem to know an awful lot about his sensory processing evaluations. Grace's face flushed red, but before she could respond, my phone rang again. This time, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Bernie, I hope I'm not bothering you, but there's someone here asking questions about you and Danny. My heart stopped. What kind of questions? A woman from Child Protective Services. She says she's following up on a complaint. She's asked me about whether I've noticed any concerning behavior, whether Danny seems well cared for. I told her, you're a wonderful father, but I thought you should know. I closed my eyes, feeling the world tilt beneath me. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'll be right home. When I hung up, both Grace and Mom were staring at me. That was my neighbor, I said quietly. CPS is at my house right now, following up on a complaint. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Grace's reaction was different. Her face showed shock, but underneath it, I saw something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Grace, I said, my voice deadly calm. Did you call Child Protective Services on me? She started, then stopped. Did you call CPS and report me as an unfit parent? Grace's silence was deafening. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Grace, tell me you didn't. Grace lifted her chin defiantly. Someone had to do something. Bernie is so focused on fixing Danny that he can't see he's making things worse. That child needs stability, not constant doctor appointments and therapy sessions that make him think he's broken. I have never wanted to hit someone so badly in my entire life. My hands shook with the effort of keeping them at my sides. You called CPS on me because you disagree with evidence-based therapy for autism spectrum disorder. I called because I'm worried about my nephew living with a father who can't accept reality. Danny's voice drifted in from the living room, singing along with a cartoon theme song. Sweet, innocent, completely unaware that his aunt had just tried to have him removed from the only stable home he had ever known. I have to go, I said, my voice hollow. I have to go deal with the child welfare investigation that my own sister triggered. I walked toward the living room to get Danny, but Grace called after me. Bernie, wait. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to help. I turned back to look at her. Help who, Grace? Because it sure as hell wasn't Danny. As I helped Danny gather his things, my mind was already racing ahead to the questions I would face from the caseworker. How would I explain that my own family had turned against us? How would I prove that Grace's complaints were motivated by malice, rather than genuine concern? Danny slipped his small hand into mine as we walked to the car. Dad, is Aunt Grace still mad at me? I knelt down to his level, looking into his trusting brown eyes. Aunt Grace isn't mad at you, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that have nothing to do with kids. But she said I need a helmet and a hand. Does that mean I'm broken? My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. No, Danny, you are not broken. You are perfect exactly the way you are. But as I drove home to face a CPS investigation triggered by my own sister, I wondered how much damage had already been done. How long had Grace been undermining Danny's confidence and my parenting behind my back? And how many other family members had she convinced that I was failing my son? The war had begun, and I was just beginning to understand how long Grace had been planning this attack. The CPS caseworker was professional, but thorough. Margaret Torres spent 2 hours in my house, interviewing Danny separately, examining his bedroom, reviewing his medical records, and asking detailed questions about our daily routines. By the time she left, I felt like my entire life had been dissected under a microscope. Mr. Patterson, she said as she gathered her paperwork, I want to be clear that nothing I've seen today raises any red flags. Your son is well cared for, your home is safe and nurturing, and Danny speaks about you with obvious affection and trust. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by anger. So, the complaint was unfounded. Completely unfounded. In my professional opinion, whoever filed this report either has very poor judgment or questionable motives. After she left, I sat in my living room watching Danny build an elaborate city with his blocks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace's attack was just beginning. The CPS complaint was too calculated, too specific. Someone had given them detailed information about Danny's therapy schedule and my work hours. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Rachel. Hey Bernie, can you call me when you get a chance? Something weird happened today. I called her back immediately. Bernie, thank God. Rachel's voice was troubled. I got the strangest call today from Grace. She said she was worried about you and Danny, and she wanted to know if I had noticed anything concerning when we visited last month. What kind of concerning? She kept pushing me to remember if you seemed stressed, if Danny seemed unhappy, if you ever lost your temper. She was asking really leading questions like, she wanted me to say something specific. My blood chilled. What did you tell her? I told her she was being ridiculous. You're one of the best fathers I know. But Bernie, she was taking notes. I could hear her typing while we talked. Taking notes. Building a case. Rachel, did she ask you to sign anything? Well, she mentioned something about a character reference, but I told her I didn't understand why you would need one. Why are you asking? I explained about the CPS visit and Grace's role in triggering it. Rachel was horrified. Bernie, I had no idea. But now that you mention it, she called Uncle Frank yesterday too, and Aunt Susan. She's been reaching out to the whole family. After I hung up with Rachel, I started making more calls. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Grace hadn't just called CPS. She had been systematically contacting every member of our extended family, fishing for negative stories about my parenting. She had presented herself as a concerned aunt who wanted to help Danny, but was worried about approaching me directly. Uncle Frank admitted that Grace had convinced him to write a letter describing an incident where I had lost patience with Danny during his birthday party last year. I remembered that day Danny had gotten overwhelmed by the noise and crowd and had a meltdown. I had calmly removed him from the situation, helped him regulate, and we had returned to the party within 10 minutes. Grace had twisted it into evidence of my inability to handle Danny's needs. Aunt Susan had signed a statement saying she was concerned about Bernie's tendency to over-medicate Danny's behavioral issues. Danny wasn't on any medication. He never had been. But Grace had convinced Susan that his therapy interventions were actually pharmaceutical treatments. The scope of Grace's campaign against me was breathtaking. She hadn't just made a few phone calls. She had spent weeks building a case, manipulating family members, gathering signatures, and constructing a narrative of parental unfitness that could have torn my family apart. That evening, after Danny went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to document everything I could remember. The timeline of Grace's behavior, the family members she had contacted, the false information she had spread. My phone rang. It was Mom. "Bernie, honey, can we talk?" "About what, Mom?" "About what happened today. About Grace." I waited. "I think maybe I made some mistakes," she continued. "I didn't realize that Grace was using the information I shared with her to hurt you and Danny." "Mom, you gave her access to his private therapy reports." "I know, and I'm sorry. I thought I was helping them understand each other better." Grace seemed so interested in learning about Danny's needs. "She wasn't interested in understanding him, Mom. She was gathering ammunition." There was a long pause. "Bernie, there's something else you need to know." My grip tightened on the phone. "Grace asked me to sign some papers last week. She said they were character references for a job application. But now I'm wondering..." "What kind of papers?" "Legal documents. She said the teaching position she was applying for required family references because she would be working with special needs children." Special needs children. Grace had never expressed any interest in working with special needs kids. In fact, she had spent years mocking Danny's needs. "Mom, do you remember what the paper said?" "Something about my observations of Grace's interactions with children, her patience level, her understanding of developmental challenges." "But Bernie, some of the questions were about you too. About your parenting style, your relationship with Danny." I closed my eyes. "What did you write?" "I wrote that Grace was patient and caring, but I also wrote that you were a devoted father, doing your best in a difficult situation." Difficult situation. Even my mother saw raising Danny as a burden to be endured rather than a joy to be celebrated. "Mom, I need you to think carefully. Did Grace ever ask you to take photos of any documents?" Silence. Mom, she said she wanted to understand Danny's diagnosis better. She asked if she could take pictures of his therapy reports so she could research autism spectrum disorder and be more supportive. My heart sank. Grace had photographs of Danny's private medical records. "How many reports, Mom?" "All of them," she whispered. She said she wanted to educate herself about his needs. I hung up the phone and stared at my legal pad. The picture Grace had been painting became clearer with each revelation. She hadn't just been mocking Danny. She had been systematically gathering evidence to support a narrative that I was an overwhelmed single father in denial about his child's limitations. But why? What did Grace gain from destroying my reputation and potentially damaging Danny's life? I opened my laptop and started researching. What I found made everything click into place. Guardianship law in Ohio. Kinship care benefits. Social Security disability payments for children in state custody. Grace wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to position herself as Danny's alternative caregiver. If she could convince a court that I was unfit, she could petition for guardianship. And as Danny's legal guardian, she would have access to his disability benefits, his therapy funding, and any support services he qualified for. My sister wasn't just cruel. She was calculating. She saw my vulnerable child as a potential source of income. I stayed up until 3 a.m. printing articles about guardianship fraud, documenting every conversation I could remember, and building my own case. Because this wasn't over. Grace had shown her hand, but I was certain she had more moves planned. The next morning, Danny bounced into the kitchen in his pajamas, his hair sticking up in 3 different directions. "Dad, can we work on my car project today?" His science fair project was a model of a car engine that he had been building for weeks. It was intricate, detailed, and far more sophisticated than most kids his age could handle. Danny understood the mechanics, instinctively could explain how each component worked and why it was necessary. "Absolutely, buddy, after breakfast." As Danny ate his cereal, chattering about pistons and cylinders, I marveled at his resilience. Despite everything Grace had said and done, despite the investigation and the family drama, he remained his bright, curious self. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Bernie, this is Linda Martinez from Clearview Elementary. I'm the special education coordinator. Can you call me when you have a chance? We need to discuss some concerns that were brought to our attention." The school now. Grace's campaign was expanding. I called immediately. "Mr. Patterson, thank you for calling back. We received some disturbing information last week, and I wanted to address it with you directly." "What kind of information?" An anonymous caller suggested that Danny's IEP accommodations might be excessive and that you might be pressuring staff to provide unnecessary services. They also claimed that Danny's behavioral incidents at school were more severe than we were reporting to you. None of that was true. Danny had minimal behavioral incidents at school, and his IEP accommodations were standard for children with his diagnosis. "Ms. Martinez, have you reviewed Danny's file recently?" "Of course. That's why I'm calling you directly, instead of launching an investigation. Danny is one of our most successful inclusion students. His progress this year has been remarkable, and his teachers consistently report that he's a joy to have in class." So the complaint was baseless. Completely baseless. But Mr. Patterson, whoever made this call, had very specific information about Danny's accommodations and your involvement in his education planning. This wasn't a random complaint. Another family member with inside information. Grace's network of manipulation was wider than I had realized. "Ms. Martinez, if you receive any more complaints about my family, would you please contact me directly before taking any action?" "Absolutely. And Mr. Patterson, for what it's worth, we consider you one of our most engaged and effective parent advocates. Danny is lucky to have you." After I hung up, Danny looked up from his cereal bowl. "Dad, why do people keep calling about me?" The question broke my heart. He was 7 years old and already aware that he was the subject of adult conversations and concerns. Sometimes grown-ups get confused about things, buddy. But the important thing is that you're safe and loved. "I know that," he said matter-of-factly. "You tell me every day." As we worked on his engine project that afternoon, carefully gluing tiny plastic components and painting details, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just defend against Grace's attacks anymore. I was going to go on the offensive. Because Danny deserved better than living under the shadow of his aunt's cruelty. And I was going to make sure he got it. Monday morning brought another surprise. I was drinking coffee and packing Danny's lunch when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Bernard Patterson?" "Yes, who's calling?" "This is James Mitchell from Mitchell & Associates Family Law. I'm calling on behalf of your sister Grace Patterson." My blood turned to ice. "What can I do for you, Mr. Mitchell?" "Ms. Patterson has expressed some concerns about the welfare of her nephew Daniel. She's asked me to explore the possibility of filing for emergency guardianship." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emergency guardianship was for situations where a child was in immediate danger. "On what grounds?" I managed to ask. "Ms. Patterson has documented concerns about your ability to meet Daniel's complex medical and educational needs as a single parent. She's provided evidence of missed therapy appointments concerning behavioral incidents and reports from family members questioning your emotional stability." Every word was a lie. Danny hadn't missed a single therapy appointment in 2 years. His behavioral incidents were minimal and well managed, and the only family member questioning my emotional stability was Grace herself. "Mr. Mitchell, I think you've been given some inaccurate information." Ms. Patterson anticipated you might say that. She's prepared to present her case to a family court judge if necessary. However, she wanted to give you the opportunity to voluntarily agree to shared custody arrangements that would provide Daniel with additional support. Shared custody. Grace wanted legal authority over my son. "I'm going to need to call you back," I said. "Of course. But Mr. Patterson, I should mention that Ms. Patterson has already begun the preliminary filing process. If you're not willing to negotiate this matter, we'll proceed through the courts." I hung up and immediately called my own lawyer, David Rodriguez, who had handled my divorce 3 years earlier. "Bernie, what's going on?" David's voice was concerned. I explained the situation, reading him the names of witnesses Grace had apparently lined up and the accusations she was making. "Bernie, this is serious. Emergency guardianship petitions get fast-tracked through the system. If Grace has convinced a judge that Danny is in immediate danger, they could issue a temporary custody order within days." "But none of her accusations are true." "Truth and evidence are different things in family court. What matters is what Grace can prove to a judge who doesn't know your family." "What do I do?" "First, document everything. Every interaction with Grace. Every family member she's contacted. Every false complaint she's made. Second, gather your own evidence. Testimony from Danny's teachers, therapists, pediatrician. Character references from people who actually know you as a father." "What about the guardianship petition?" "If she files, we'll fight it aggressively. But Bernie, you need to understand that even baseless accusations can do damage. The process itself will be stressful for Danny, and it will create a public record of these allegations." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like the walls were closing in. Grace wasn't just trying to hurt me anymore. She was trying to take my son. Danny appeared in the doorway in his school clothes backpack slung over his shoulder. "Ready for school, Dad?" I looked at my beautiful boy, his face bright with anticipation for the day ahead, and felt a surge of protective rage so intense, it took my breath away. "Ready, buddy." On the drive to school, Danny chattered about his upcoming science fair presentation. His engine model was finished, and he was excited to explain how internal combustion worked to his classmates. "Mrs. Peterson says some high school kids are coming to see our projects," he said proudly. "She thinks mine is good enough for the advanced category." "I think so too, buddy. You worked really hard on it." As I watched him walk into the school building, shoulders straight and confident, I made a promise to myself. Grace would not destroy his sense of security. She would not make him doubt his place in the world. And she would not take him away from me. I spent the day making phone calls, gathering documentation, and building my defense. Danny's occupational therapist provided a detailed letter describing his progress and my exemplary involvement in his care. His teacher wrote a glowing recommendation, praising both Danny's development and my support of his education. His pediatrician confirmed that Danny was thriving under my care and that all his medical needs were being appropriately addressed. But I also started digging into Grace's background. If she was going to attack my fitness as a parent, I was going to examine her qualifications to care for any child. What I found was troubling. Grace had been fired from her last 3 jobs for attendance issues and conflicts with supervisors. Her college transcripts showed a pattern of incomplete courses and academic probation. Her credit report revealed thousands of dollars in unpaid bills and defaulted loans. More disturbing was what I discovered about her finances. Grace had been living off unemployment benefits for 8 months, but she had been posting photos on social media showing expensive purchases and activities. Designer clothes, spa treatments, weekend trips to Chicago and Indianapolis. I called Mom to ask where Grace was getting money for these luxuries. "Oh, I've been helping her out," Mom said casually. "She's struggling to find work in her field, so I've been covering some of her expenses until she gets back on her feet." "How much money are you talking about, Mom?" "Just a few hundred here and there. Her student loan payments, her car insurance. Sometimes I help with rent money. A few hundred here and there for 8 months, while Grace maintained an expensive lifestyle. I estimated Mom had been giving Grace at least $1,500 a month. "Mom, can I see your bank statements?" Bernie, that's a very personal. Grace is trying to take Danny away from me. She's filed legal papers claiming I'm an unfit parent. I need to understand how she's funding this attack. There was a long silence. She filed legal papers. I explained about the lawyer's call and Grace's guardianship petition. Mom was quiet for several minutes. "I'll email you the bank statements," she finally said. What I saw in those statements made my head spin. In the past 6 months, Mom had written checks to Grace totaling over $8,000. But there were also cash withdrawals that didn't match Grace's known expenses. I called the bank and asked to speak with someone about potential financial elder abuse. The representative was helpful but cautious. "Mr. Patterson, we can investigate unusual account activity, but only if the account holder requests it or if we have evidence of coercion." What would constitute evidence of coercion? Sudden changes in spending patterns, large withdrawals for unclear purposes, or family members gaining unauthorized access to accounts. I studied Mom's statements more carefully. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for. Grace's request for money had started small and gradually increased. The cash withdrawals began 3 months ago and had become weekly occurrences. But the most damning discovery was a cashier's check made out to Mitchell and Associates for $2,500. Grace was using Mom's money to fund her legal attack against me. I called David Rodriguez back. "David, I think Grace is committing financial elder abuse against our mother to pay for this guardianship petition." "That's a serious allegation, Bernie. Can you prove it?" I explained about the bank statements and the cashier's check. "That changes things significantly. If Grace is using fraudulently obtained funds to attack your parental rights, we can potentially get her petition dismissed and file criminal charges." "What do I need to do?" "Document everything. And Bernie, you might want to consider filing for a restraining order. If Grace is desperate enough to steal from your mother, she might escalate in other ways." That afternoon, when I picked Danny up from school, his teacher asked to speak with me privately. Mr. Patterson, Danny had a wonderful day. His science project presentation was excellent. But I wanted you to know that someone called the school today asking questions about your pickup arrangements. My heart stopped. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know if Danny had ever been picked up by anyone other than you, if he had ever seemed reluctant to go home, if he had ever mentioned being afraid of you." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that our school policy is to refer all inquiries about students to the main office, and that any concerns about child welfare should go through proper channels." "Did they give you a name?" "They claimed to be from Child Protective Services, but when I asked for a case number and supervisor contact, they hung up." Grace was fishing for more ammunition, making false official inquiries to create a paper trail of concerns about my parenting. That evening, after Danny went to bed, I sat down with my laptop and started typing. If Grace wanted to play dirty, I would give her a fight she would never forget. I was done being defensive. It was time to go on the attack. The next morning brought a knock on my door at 7:30 a.m. I opened it to find a sheriff's deputy holding an official-looking document. "Bernard Patterson." "Yes." "You're being served with a petition for emergency guardianship and a temporary restraining order." My hands shook as I read the papers. Grace had convinced a judge that Danny was in immediate danger and needed protection from me. The restraining order prohibited me from leaving the state with Danny and required me to allow Grace supervised visitation rights, pending a full hearing. Supervised visitation rights for a woman who had spent months mocking and undermining my child. The petition was filled with lies presented as facts. Grace claimed that I had missed numerous therapy appointments, that Danny's teachers had expressed concerns about his emotional state, that family members had witnessed me losing control during Danny's behavioral episodes. Each allegation was footnoted with supporting documentation. Letters from family members, photographs of therapy reports, even a sworn statement from someone claiming to be Danny's former babysitter, describing incidents of neglect. I had never hired a babysitter. Danny had only been cared for by me, his mother, during visitation periods, and occasionally by Mom when I had work emergencies. Grace had fabricated an entire witness. I called David Rodriguez immediately. "I'm looking at the petition now," he said. "Bernie, this is sophisticated work. Grace has created a compelling narrative supported by what appears to be substantial evidence. But it's all lies. I know that, and you know that. But Grace has done her homework. She's anticipated the evidence you're likely to present, and she's created counter-narratives for everything. What about the financial abuse? The forged documents? We'll present that at the hearing, but right now our immediate concern is the emergency order. You have 72 hours to respond, and Grace is demanding a same-day hearing." "Can she do that?" "If she can convince the judge that Danny is in imminent danger, yes." I spent the morning gathering every piece of positive documentation I could find. Report cards, therapy, progress notes, teacher recommendations, medical records showing Danny's excellent health and development. But Grace had been thorough. For every piece of evidence supporting my parenting, she had created a corresponding allegation that twisted it into proof of my unfitness. Danny's excellent grades became evidence that I was pressuring him academically beyond his capabilities. His therapy progress became proof that his needs were so severe that I couldn't manage them alone. His positive relationship with his teachers became concern that I was manipulating school staff to hide problems at home. At noon, my phone rang. It was Mom, and she was crying. "Bernie, I just got off the phone with Grace's lawyer. They want me to testify at the hearing tomorrow." "About what?" "About Grace's relationship with Danny, about your parenting, about—" She paused, struggling with the words. "About my concerns regarding your emotional stability." "Mom, please tell me you're not going to help Grace try to take Danny away from me." "Bernie, I don't want Danny taken away from you. But Grace says she's not trying to take him away. She says she just wants to help provide him with additional support and resources." The manipulation was breathtaking. Grace had convinced our mother that destroying my parental rights was actually an act of kindness. "Mom, Grace has been stealing money from your bank account to pay for this legal attack. She's been filming Danny's worst moments and sharing them with relatives for entertainment. She's been making false reports to CPS and Danny's school. This isn't about helping Danny. This is about hurting me." "Bernie, honey, I think you're being a little paranoid. Mom, look at your bank statements. Look at the withdrawals Grace has been making. Look at the cashier's check she wrote to her lawyer using your money." There was a long pause. "I'll call you back," she said quietly. An hour later, she called back. Her voice was different, shaky and confused. "Bernie, I found the bank statements. I didn't realize how much money I had been giving Grace. And you're right about the cashier's check. I don't remember writing that." "Mom, I think Grace has been forging your signature." "But that would be—" She trailed off. "Fraud, financial elder abuse, a felony." That afternoon, Danny and I went to the police station. I filed a complaint about Grace's fraudulent use of Mom's accounts and provided copies of all the forged documents and false statements she had created. The detective, Sandra Walsh, was sympathetic but cautious. "Mr. Patterson, these are serious allegations. But family court disputes often involve accusations and counter-accusations. What makes you believe your sister's actions rise to the level of criminal fraud?" I showed her the fake babysitter statement, the forged family letters, and the bank records showing Grace's unauthorized access to Mom's money. "This isn't just a family disagreement," I explained. "Grace has created fraudulent evidence to support a legal petition that could result in my losing custody of my son. She's using stolen money to fund the attack, and she's done all of this while claiming to act in my child's best interests." Detective Walsh studied the documents carefully. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to open an investigation, but I need to warn you that criminal proceedings move slowly, and your family court hearing is tomorrow. Even if we ultimately prove fraud, that might not help you in the immediate custody dispute." That evening, I sat Danny down for a difficult conversation. "Buddy, tomorrow we have to go to court and talk to a judge." "Are we in trouble?" "No, we're not in trouble. But Aunt Grace thinks she should help take care of you, and the judge needs to decide if that's a good idea. Danny considered this seriously. I don't want Aunt Grace to take care of me. She makes me feel bad about myself. What do you mean? She laughs when I get upset, and she takes pictures of me when I don't want her to, and she tells other people that I'm broken. My heart broke for him. At 7 years old, he had already internalized Grace's cruelty. Danny, you are not broken. You are perfect, exactly the way you are. And no matter what happens tomorrow, I will always be your dad, and I will always fight for you. That night, after Danny fell asleep, I stayed up until 3 a.m. preparing for the hearing. I reviewed every document rehearsed, every argument, and tried to anticipate Grace's strategy. But I kept coming back to one inescapable truth: Grace had spent months planning this attack, while I had been focused on being a good father. She had played chess while I was playing checkers. Tomorrow would determine whether truth and evidence could overcome lies and manipulation. Tomorrow would determine whether I would remain Danny's father or become a visitor in his life. Tomorrow would determine everything. The family court hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived early with David Rodriguez, my arms full of documentation supporting my case. Danny sat quietly in the waiting area with Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who had agreed to provide childcare during the proceedings. Grace arrived at 9:50 with her lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit who carried himself with confident authority. She had dressed conservatively, navy blue dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a professional style. She looked like the responsible adult, while I felt rumpled and desperate in my best suit that was 3 years old. Mr. Patterson. Judge Elizabeth Hartwell called the case to order. I've reviewed the emergency petition filed by Ms. Grace Patterson. These are serious allegations regarding the welfare of your son Daniel. Grace's lawyer, Mr. Mitchell, stood first. His presentation was polished and devastating. He painted a picture of a well-meaning but overwhelmed single father who refused to acknowledge his limitations, while a loving aunt watched helplessly as her nephew's needs went unmet. Your Honor, Ms. Patterson has documented a pattern of concerning behavior spanning several months. Mr. Patterson has missed critical therapy appointments, ignored educational recommendations, and displayed concerning emotional volatility when challenged about his parenting choices. He presented a timeline of incidents, each one footnoted with supporting evidence. The missed therapy appointments turned out to be 2 sessions that I had rescheduled due to work emergencies, perfectly normal and approved by the therapist. But Grace had documented them as evidence of neglect. The ignored educational recommendations were actually my refusal to agree to have Danny placed in a more restrictive classroom, setting a placement his IEP team had unanimously agreed was unnecessary. The emotional volatility was my response to Grace's cruelty at Sunday lunch, but Mitchell presented it as an explosive outburst witnessed by concerned family members. Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Patterson has recently begun making paranoid accusations against Ms. Patterson, claiming she has fabricated evidence and manipulated family members. These conspiracy theories suggest a concerning detachment from reality that puts Daniel at risk. When it was our turn, David Rodriguez methodically dismantled Grace's case. He presented letters from Danny's teachers, therapists, and pediatrician, all testifying to my exemplary parenting and Danny's excellent progress. He showed the judge Danny's report cards, therapy progress reports, and achievement certificates. He presented testimony from neighbors, friends, and co-workers describing me as a devoted father and Danny as a happy, thriving child. But the most powerful moment came when David presented the evidence of Grace's fraud. Your Honor, what we're dealing with here isn't a concerned aunt trying to help her nephew. This is a systematic campaign of manipulation and fraud designed to damage Mr. Patterson's reputation and gain access to his child. He showed the judge screenshots of Grace's family circus group chat, the videos she had shared mocking Danny, and the cruel commentary she had encouraged from relatives. He presented bank records showing Grace's unauthorized access to our mother's accounts and the forged signatures she had used to fund her legal attack. Most damning was the fake babysitter statement. David had tracked down the alleged witness who turned out to be Grace's college roommate, with no knowledge of Danny or our family. Your Honor, Ms. Patterson has committed multiple felonies in her effort to gain custody of this child. She has stolen thousands of dollars from her elderly mother, created fraudulent documents, filed false reports with child welfare agencies, and systematically harassed and defamed her own brother. Grace's confident demeanor began to crack as David presented evidence after evidence of her lies. Her face went pale when he showed the judge proof that she had been stealing from Mom. But Grace's lawyer was skilled. He acknowledged that some of Grace's methods might have been questionable, while arguing that her underlying concerns were valid. Your Honor, even if Ms. Patterson's approach was imperfect, that doesn't negate the legitimate concerns about Daniel's welfare. This child has complex needs that require more support than a single working parent can provide. Judge Hartwell studied the evidence for what felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. Ms. Patterson, I'm troubled by the evidence presented today. The court finds that you have engaged in deliberate deception regarding your qualifications as a caregiver and your motives for seeking guardianship. Grace's face crumpled. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that you have committed financial crimes against your own mother to fund this petition. I am dismissing your guardianship request and referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Relief flooded through me, but Judge Hartwell wasn't finished. However, Mr. Patterson, while the court finds no evidence that you are an unfit parent, I am concerned about the family dysfunction that has been exposed in this proceeding. I am ordering family counseling for all parties and appointing a guardian ad litem to monitor Daniel's well-being for the next 6 months. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Danny would stay with me. As we left the courthouse, Grace was crying in the parking lot, while her lawyer packed up his briefcase with obvious distaste for his client. Grace, I called to her. She looked up, her makeup streaked, and her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. This is over, I said quietly. Stay away from Danny, stay away from me, and stay away from Mom's money. Bernie, I never meant... You meant every bit of it. You saw a vulnerable child, and you saw dollar signs. You saw a loving family, and you decided to destroy it for your own gain. Grace's expression hardened into the familiar defiant mask I remembered from childhood. You think you've won. This isn't over, Bernie. I'll find another way. No, Grace, you won't, because everyone knows who you really are now. That afternoon, I picked Danny up from school and took him out for ice cream. He had won second place in the science fair with his engine project, and I wanted to celebrate. Dad, he said as he licked his chocolate cone. Mrs. Peterson said you came to court today. That's right, buddy. Did you tell the judge that I don't want to live with Aunt Grace? I told the judge that we're a family, and families stick together. Danny nodded seriously. Good, because I like living with you. You make me feel brave. As we drove home, I realized that Grace had actually done me a favor. Her attack had forced me to document and celebrate everything wonderful about my relationship with Danny. It had shown me how many people supported us and believed in our family. But most importantly, it had shown Danny that I would fight for him, no matter what, that he was worth fighting for, that he was loved, valued, and protected. Grace had tried to destroy us, but instead, she had made us stronger. 6 months later, Danny and I were building a treehouse in our backyard. The guardian ad litem had filed her final report, recommending that all court supervision be terminated. Danny was thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. I had received a promotion at work, and we had moved into a larger house with a yard perfect for his engineering projects. Grace had left Ohio within a week of the court hearing. The criminal investigation had resulted in charges for financial elder abuse and fraud. She had plea bargained for probation and restitution, but the condition was that she maintained no contact with our family for 5 years. Mom had started therapy to understand how she had enabled Grace's manipulation. She had also changed her banking arrangements to prevent future, unauthorized access. Our relationship was healing slowly with the help of the family counseling the judge had ordered. The most remarkable change was in Danny himself. Without Grace's constant undermining, his confidence had blossomed. He had made friends at school, joined the chess club, and started asking if he could try martial arts. His teachers consistently reported that he was one of the most improved students they had ever worked with. "Dad, can we make the treehouse big enough for sleepovers?" Danny asked as he handed me another piece of lumber. "I think that's a great idea, buddy." As we worked together, I reflected on everything we had been through. Grace's attack had been vicious and calculated, but it had also revealed truths I might never have discovered otherwise. It had shown me which family members truly supported us, and which ones were willing to sacrifice a child's well-being for entertainment or personal gain. More importantly, it had taught me that sometimes protecting the people you love means cutting toxic people out of your life, even when those people are family. Danny was explaining his design modifications for the treehouse, his face animated with excitement as he described pulley systems and secret storage compartments. This was the child Grace had called broken, this brilliant, creative, loving boy who saw the world with wonder and possibility. "Dad," Danny said as we took a break for lunch, "I'm glad Aunt Grace isn't mean to me anymore." "Me too, buddy. Do you think she'll ever learn to be nice?" It was such an innocent question, filled with the natural forgiveness of childhood. "I hope so, Danny. But sometimes people have to want to change, and that's not something we can control." "Well, I hope she gets help, because being mean all the time must make her very sad inside." The wisdom of my 7-year-old son never ceased to amaze me. Even after everything Grace had done to us, he could still feel compassion for her. That evening, as Danny worked on his latest project, a robot built from recycled materials, I wrote in the journal I had started keeping during our legal battle. The therapist had suggested it as a way to process the trauma and track our healing. Today's entry was different from the angry, fearful entries of 6 months ago. Danny won the regional science competition today. His robot can navigate obstacles and respond to voice commands. The judges said it was the most sophisticated project they had seen from an elementary school student. When they asked him where he learned robotics, he said, "My dad taught me that if you understand how something works, you can build anything." I never taught him robotics. What I taught him was curiosity, persistence, and the belief that his mind was powerful enough to solve any problem. Grace tried to convince everyone that Danny was limited, damaged, in need of protection from his own potential. Instead, we discovered that the only limits on his abilities were the ones other people tried to impose. The treehouse is almost finished. Next week, we're starting work on a workshop in the garage where Danny can build bigger projects. He wants to try building a go-kart for next summer. I used to worry about what kind of future Danny would have, whether he would be able to live independently, whether he would find people who appreciated his unique gifts. Now I know that Danny will create whatever future he chooses, because he's learned that he has the power to build his own dreams. Grace thought she could destroy our family by exposing what she saw as our weaknesses. Instead, she helped us discover our strengths. She forced us to fight for each other, and in doing so, we learned how much we were worth fighting for. As I finished writing, Danny called from his bedroom. "Dad, come look at this." I found him in his pajamas, sitting on his bed with his tablet, showing me videos of advanced robotics projects. "Dad, do you think I could build something like this when I'm older?" I looked at the screen, showing a robot that could climb stairs and open doors, then looked at my son's eager face. "Danny, I think you could build something even better." His smile lit up the room. "Really?" "Really. Because you have something those engineers didn't have when they were kids." "What's that?" "A dad who believes in you completely and will never stop fighting for your dreams." Danny launched himself into my arms for a hug that lasted long enough for me to memorize the feeling. This was what Grace had tried to destroy, this moment of pure love and trust between a father and son. This was what I had fought to protect. As I tucked Danny into bed, he asked his usual bedtime question. "Dad, what's the most important thing?" It was a ritual we had started during the darkest days of our legal battle, a way of ending each day with something positive. The most important thing is that we're family, no matter what anyone else says. And the second most important thing, family means we never give up on each other. And the third most important thing, you are perfect exactly the way you are, and your future is as big as your imagination. Danny smiled sleepily. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, buddy. Sweet dreams." As I turned off his light and walked back to the living room, I thought about the question that had haunted me during Grace's attack. What if she was right? What if I was deluding myself about Danny's potential? What if I was setting him up for disappointment by believing in him so completely? Now I knew the answer. The greatest gift I could give my son wasn't protection from failure or disappointment. It was the unshakable knowledge that someone believed in his worth, his potential, and his right to chase whatever dreams he could imagine. Grace had tried to convince me that loving Danny meant accepting limitations. She was wrong. Loving Danny meant refusing to accept anyone else's limitations on what he could become. The treehouse would be finished next weekend. Danny had already planned our first sleepover under the stars, complete with a telescope he was building from a kit. We would lie on our backs, looking at the universe, and I would tell him that it was no bigger than the possibilities inside his remarkable mind. Grace had called him broken, but she was the one who was truly damaged by jealousy, greed, and the inability to see beauty in differences. Danny wasn't broken. He was beautifully, perfectly himself. And that was more than enough. That was everything. The war was over, and love had won. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was hurting someone you love? How did you find the strength to set boundaries and protect what mattered most? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've navigated difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and protecting the people we love. And if you know someone who's dealing with toxic family dynamics, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that it's okay to choose love over loyalty to people who don't deserve it. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember, the families we choose to protect are often more important than the families we're born into. Keep fighting for what matters. Keep building treehouse dreams, and keep believing that love is always stronger than cruelty.